This is using query for April 19, 2021. I think we're going to talk a little bit about the issues queue, an opportunity for people who are collaborating on data sets to keep the conversations around the data set and its versions paired with the work being done to it. We've been talking over the last couple of weeks with a range of different types of users about whether this feature would be valuable and what it would have to do or contain, or what you'd have to be able to do with this to make it valuable. And I think there's actually quite a few interesting things. I think the one thing I'm sort of most interested to learn over the last couple of weeks is how powerful this is, as simple as it is, how powerful it is in terms of driving value for a lot of our folks. So we've been talking about the history tab and automation and querying and other things, but just a simple issues queue seems to take care of a lot of the headaches of, the body of an email with an attached CSV being lost to history is being, or Slack messages saying, here's the latest version, blah, blah, blah. It seems like a lot of people really see a value in an organized queue of issues that can be open and closed. So that's been kind of exciting. So this is the latest wire for it. Pretty simple kind of first draft of just open issues and closed. These are, we're viewing open issues by default. So these are 8 of the 18 issues that have ever been posted. And I think this is pre-sorted by the date it was created, or maybe even the last, well, we haven't talked about defaults too much. Maybe that's something we can spend some time on today, but this was, opened a month ago, okay. And just little personas that pop up. I think you'd have to sign in and have a query account in order to file an issue. But when you do, just some basic information about whether the issue's open or not, who started it and when that was started, and the number, the integer number 8 at the back half of the first issue message being the number and sequence of the total issues. I suppose that's the number. Well, actually, that's a good question. Is this the 8th issue ever, or is this number 8 among those that are open?
I think it's the 8th issue ever.
Yeah, I think it totally should be. Yeah. Cool. So we can talk about some of the things we learned. I think one of the questions Chris and I have tried to ask everybody is whether they think the issues ought to be done on a per version basis, or whether there should be a global just flow of issues surrounding the data set as it evolves. And well, we haven't really done the math on this, but my gut reaction is it's like 7-3 for global issue queues. Some people saw value in both, which I think is really complicated and probably messy, but I think we led with the hypothesis that issue queue for the entire data set, not version by version, would be the best thing. And I think that's basically being agreed to by the people we've been interviewing. That was like my first potential hot take. I don't know, I haven't talked about with Chris about that yet.
Yeah, one more thing that came up was just the ability to tag a version, which is that's what you're talking about. I mean, basically like asking at a given timestamp is essentially the same as tagging the latest version, if you want to connect it in your brain that way, but like it might be interesting to discreetly say, can I just literally like use the UI and say like attach this version as like a flag or as something that is some kind of thing that can live with this issue in perpetuity, and I can click on it and go back to see that version and see all the things query can tell me about that version. It kind of reinforces that there's version control, which is a wonderful thing for data, and like I think will just be an interesting artifact that can live on with the issue. I don't know. I was going to comment that like I found it interesting. I guess when we present our product vision slides, we have one slide that says dreaming big, closing the data feedback loop. And I think when framed that way, it's different than just saying we have issue queues. And I think that is what is resonating with people, and what I guess would be surprising to me is that people bring that up afterwards as saying, we're totally into that. And I think it's because we called it closing the feedback loop. and not because we said we have issue queues. So I think there's also the the notion that you can add value to a data set by saying what's wrong with it, which maybe is not considered a valuable thing in a lot of cases, or in normal people's workflows. It's just something you complain about and grumble over here and say, oh, the metadata sucks for that, which is what we all do. Love the data, but the metadata sucks. Well, now you can participate.
Yeah, I would add, I think this has been an interesting stopping point in the discussion with our users as well, who want to say like, hey, is this an engineering tool that my engineers use? Or like, can I invite my business analysts to participate? Because they're going to be intimidated when they see scripts, but they can definitely file an issue that says the metadata is wrong, or maybe I can get them to take one more step and try and write column descriptions and then, save as a version. But this is like an entry level way to keep a lot of collaborators in the same space. Like if this is just a data engineer tool, then this might not be as helpful, but this allows my folks to, flag stuff for me here and us to actually collaborate on it.
Kind of want to make a slide that has like siloed groups, like engineers over here and analysts over here, and we can like make a caricature of how they normally think of each other when they're not, when they don't have ways to communicate well, and then say, we can paint this picture of the utopia where everybody's like, everyone's talking and working together towards common goals, that sort of thing. Go.
It's like, I'm like, are we using the hand raising technique here? I'll raise my hand. This looks great. I think, and obviously it's nice to hear all of the feedback that we've sort of been gathering around this. I had a couple of bits that I jump out. The notion that I think we have an advantage in the fact that query version histories are single branch, and they are designed to stay that way for a long time. And so as you mentioned, Rico, about how there's this question of like matching time to issues, like it would be really smart of us to just tag every issue with the master version that it was filed at, and actually just like create a connective statement there in the design of issues long term. I don't know that I'm dreaming out loud here. I don't know. I don't expect this to sort of shift. Rico, you're muted.
Clarifying question. Do you mean that if I wrote an issue on April 19th, that somewhere near my message would be a link to the version that was the latest version at that point? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the idea, is like that information is connected in the background. It's like when that person, and we could surface that in a way that the user could adjust it. And so they could say, I'm actually talking about before commits back type thing. But in the data model of an issue, we could just add the version that it started at, like the issue began at. Next thing I'd ask is, so on GitHub, I can just turn off whole sections like issues that I feel like should just be somewhere else. So I'm wondering if we can do like, actually I use GitHub for issues, it's over here. Can I, in the settings panel, just be like, if you want issues, go here. And it's just like, instead of the issue queue entirely, it just pushes the button and says, hey, go over here for issues, which sounds like, how do I turn this off? But at the same time, I think there's a lot of, I think there are some folks who are like, issues, no, I don't want to be talked to. I want to just release data and not have somebody file issues here and expect a response.
Maybe if I were on the phone with you asking for that, I might say, what might be interesting is just turning off discussion, like on a Twitter feed or Instagram post, or turn off discussion. But I would tell you to put that information in the README. I'm not going to build you a custom thing that tells you to go to some other app.
It's perfect. Yep. No, I love it. I think we're gonna do that right at the gates.
The closing issues might be able to do that. I don't know.
It's just a thought. I think it'd be nice for those who are like only wanting to adopt certain parts of our tool set. I agree with you though. I don't think it feels like just putting it in the README like, hey, don't file issues here. It's like plenty good start.
It sounds like the sort of thing that we should keep an eye open for, and if someone asks for it, then build it then.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that I totally agree with you, Dustin. I feel like that's the move. So if like 5 people come up to us and are like, we want this, then 5 people have taken the time to stop what they're doing and communicate with us. That means that many more want it. Cool. So if you don't mind, I'd love to take a little bit of time to talk about implementation of this and like how we actually are going to go about executing it. Because we have issues as they exist right now in Query Cloud. And I think one of the prerequisites and a lot of the power of issues is integrating with different communication platforms, specifically like sending email when new issue gets filed. Like I live with that flow all the time. When somebody opens a pull request, I get an email. If I don't get that email, then there's a very low chance that I actually respond properly to something. And so I think that tight email integration flow is really important. And to that end, Query works in a decentralized and like a sort of hybrid model where some parts of Query are centralized and some parts of Query are decentralizable. This to me, because I think there's like a tight email integration and a desire to have like faster iteration around some of these things, I think we really want to just keep the whole issues concept centralized. And what I'd like to see with this though is to keep the web UI or the user interface when I still want to be able to talk to issues even if I'm accessing query from a local node or from the distributed side of the system. And so to that end, I feel like it's just API calling in and out to get the issues associated with the data set, if there are any. So that's a bit I'd like to sort of just lay out really quickly. In my mind, all of this stays on the registry sort of definition. So all this becomes a subsection of registry endpoints. And so it'd be like registry issues, and then I give you a data set ID and you give me back the issues for that. And they're all just held on the registry. Asmer and Dustin, do you have thoughts on that? Does that comport with the way you've been thinking about issues? In particular, Asmer, who wrote the whole backend implementation of issues the first go around.
Sure. So far, like we several times already like discussed bits and pieces of this, but maybe not all at once. I think there's like 2 key pieces that we kind of have there. One being the whole logic flows through an event bus because they're kind of asynchronous and detached from the like end user. It just gets triggered somewhere, and then the background process takes over and actually executes whatever the call is meant to be. Slack notification, email notification, bury it, I don't know, whatever. And the other part is like, how do we abstract away from like different implementations for different clients? So cloud, obviously, for example, the registry will support email. On a local setup, maybe you want to support it, but that's kind of like hard mode and you do it. What we need to provide is kind of like a latch so that people can actually kind of like hook into. If I remember correctly, the last time we discussed this, the consensus was to essentially interface away the implementation of like all these, let's say, plugin type of services. And if somebody really wants to play hard mode, they can like recompile their own binary and like add their own specific hook. We'll provide like an empty interface implementation or a void implementation that just swallows that specific event bus message and just doesn't send out email, and that's kind of it. But you still work with issues. Everything's there. It's just that like that piece of email that's just like swallowing those messages, and that's it. I think that's where we landed, and to me, even back then, sounded sound. So not sure if there's any sorry, if there's any changes or objections to that model at this point.
Yeah, I think that feels right, having the empty interface for a lot of this. Dustin, do you want to chime in before I ramble again?
I don't have particularly strong feelings, but the description Asmer gave, I think, sounds good.
Cool, that's perfect. Yeah, because I think the big thing is, for now, I don't even think we need to surface much beyond an API. Like, I think search is actually the best example that we have for this right now, where there actually is no local search inquiry. We have things that get close to it, like you can filter your list of data sets, which is like search, but it's not actually search. What we do right now is if you are on Query Desktop and you search for something, it does a request over the internet to the query.cloud registry, and the response is just whatever query registry gives you back are displayed as search results. And so Asmir, what I think you're describing is this nice evolution of defining that the thing that is living on cloud that is satisfying those requests as an interface and having that interface moved into core. I think before we even do that, we can just define the API endpoints that must exist on a registry implementation that a query node running locally could call to, but more importantly, that Query Cloud and these updated mockups can use to get just their actual data hydrated they need. So I just want to like articulate, I think there's like a tiering of like, cool, there's a bunch of endpoints. If we just expose those as like endpoints, that's going to get us a bunch of mileage, and then we can move the actual interface implementation into core once we get the time to sort of like get that right. Does that feel right as like an execution plan?
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. This is good. I don't know. Anything beyond that we need to get into on the issues execution thing? This does mean that we need to be able to, like, what I would like to see is if I am operating a local node, I want the sort of like long-term UX to be the exact same. That's one of the big things that's coming out of product is like there's only one UX. And so if I'm able to create issues on Query Cloud, I should be able to create issues locally using the same API and the same UI. And so we will have to actually define an external facing API for creating an issue, which will also be nice because then that means that like we can put it as part of our API for like, if you want to programmatically create issues, here you go. This is how that would work. And so we can expose. Go ahead, Asher.
That's current to cloud anyways. I mean, you do have APIs, it's just that we have a fancy UI to kind of interact with it, so.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's already effectively there. We just need to formalize it.
Yeah, there's one more thing that we need to do, and I think it's important to get right now before we evolve it further, because like the model of the issue or the data that we hold for the issue is very rudimentary. It's just like old text and a few like reference IDs, I don't know, whatever, and timestamp. We should definitely like sit down and maybe like go through the model and kind of like think through all the stuff that we'll really need and actually do it, because right now it's just a series of like text inputs and vague IDs.
Totally. Yeah, I think a big like engineering sit down on what needs to go into this data model is really important. And specifically the thing that seems to be coming out of product is this like capacity to associate issues with versions. I think is a really important thing that we can start with in a really rudimentary sense, in the sense of like, cool, I created an issue and the version that it's associated with is just going to be head at time of creation. But like being able to make that more sophisticated later or mention multiple versions, like this is fixed with version blah. You can see how the like notion of mentioning a version or changing a version association is an important thing we should be maturing toward, even if we aren't sort of doing it out the gates. Chris.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Chris first, then Dustin.
Yeah, I think the reverse situation is also relevant, which I think you just touched on. But if I'm looking through the history view and I click back on an older version, I would love to be able to see that, 4 issues were created at this version and 6 other issues reference this version because somebody has a link to it or something in there. Whether it's like an explicit reference, like a tag, or if it's just a pasted in link to it, it would be wonderful to be able to like discover the conversations about an issue or that are relevant to it.
I like that. That sounds neat. The thing I wanted to get straight for myself is, are issues like required to have, like, I'm assuming issues have like a requirement to have the ID of the entire dataset history as like their main representation, and then the version is like an optional thing. Is that right? And it would probably be like, do we want to have things where like an issue can specify a range of versions, be like this issue exists for this range, or is it just required to have it talk about one version really?
In my mind, yeah, the way that Chris is describing that reverse aggregation is a really interesting like part where like we're now talking about a graph, right? And so like and we can sort of like we can move that conversation, I think, to as part of this growth and sophistication. And Dustin, I think you're getting at the point of like, if we just start with, okay, cool, all you can do right now is you must specify an ID, and you can maybe specify a single associative version. And then maybe we mature that to opening version and closing version to define a span. Cool, these are still two hard-coded fields, but then eventually you'd really want to be able to say, have a discussion and some mechanism for mentioning versions and say all of the associative versions of this are a set that are associated, that are abstracted and associated with the issue that can be sort of semantically pulled from text. And then that gives you the converse that Chris, you're talking about, where like, if I'm looking at a version history, I can actually see this version history has like 6 issues associated with it. 3 of them were opened on that version. One of them is this really old issue that just talks about it like, hey, we almost fixed the metadata description for half of the fields, but you know, as of version blah, it's 50% complete. That user saying as of version blah might be nice to tick that up one in the, basically having that association. This is how like GitHub implements mentions, right? Like X users mentioned this issue. But yeah, I think that's where things is, yeah. And so like, I think this is a common, thank you, Esmer. It's like a common pattern, but it's like really, I think, best satisfied by like graph databases and graph thinking, where you're thinking about different entities as nodes and lots of associations, because it's more associative than it is.
It's many to many,
yeah.
fundamentally, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can set the stage for a lot of that and just have like a sort of toe dip into that in the beginning, where all we're doing in the first pass is when I create an issue, can query subtly record when that issue was opened. And then that opens us up for building the UI that you talked about, Chris, where like I can be scrolling a version history and see a list of an enumeration of the number of issues opened at a given version. Cool. This is helpful. I already feel like we got a nice definition of like, no, we're not going to build the turn off UI thing. And we're going to build the baseline for associating versions. It's good. Anyone else have thoughts or opinions they want to close on?
This is a little bit out of scope for this conversation, but maybe the next using query call, we can talk about organizations or groups of people. Some people have sort of said, I want to be able to flag my accounting team or my blank team, as opposed to remembering that that's Brendan, Dustin, Asner, and Casey every time. So that's just coming down the pike. And I think in issues, that'll be sort of an obvious thing too. Projects is related to that too. And some questions about like, cool, so can I have multiple data sets in one project? And like, yeah, we've come across that before, for sure.
Totally. There's a lot to talk about there. And like, how do we represent those? And how do we move up into the aggregation stuff? Sets of data sets, sets of people, sets of. Yeah. I want to like get all of this base implementation done and then tackle all of that stuff in a meaningful way. Chris, did you have anything you want to close on there? Cool.
I think we got it all.
It's fun. It's fun to have really good mockups all laid out, and now a set of, and like a backing implementation, a reference implementation to sort of like think through this with. We can actually say that we have our heads around how to build this. We've built it once, and we're just like enhancing it a bit and making it a little more declarative. Cool. Well, thank you for your time, everybody. Thank you, Rico and Chris, for walking us through this.
Always. Tune in next time.